So welcome everyone, and thank you all for coming to the Sustainability Showdown. My name is Melissa, and I'm an undergraduate intern for the Office of Sustainability, and I'm currently a senior studying environmental science, and I've been an intern with the office since my sophomore year. The Sustainability Showdown is a panel series created by our office to inform the Brown community about about the sustainability goals and initiatives Brown is working towards. A lot of great projects go behind the scenes at facilities management where our office is housed, and we want to make sure that students, faculty, and staff are a part of them. Today's session will focus specifically on the university's sustainability plan. We will cover phase 1 of the university's first sustainability plan and discuss the next steps in its development. Following the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, and you will be allowed to ask questions for the panelists. Please submit any questions you might have in the Q&A Zoom function, and you can find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can ask questions during or after the presentation. We have 3 amazing panelists from the Office of Sustainability who will introduce themselves in just a bit. But before we get started, we just wanted to thank you all for coming. We are very excited to begin a dialogue between the office and the rest of the Brown community and share the exciting projects that we're working on. And so without further ado, let's get started. Panelists, please introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Jess Berry. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability. As mentioned, we are housed out of facilities management, but we really work across the university. My role is to really support my staff and all of the projects and programs that they undertake, as well as to work across the university on strategic planning and initiatives in regard to sustainability. And some of those you will hear about today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Erin Royal, and I'm the Sustainability Programs Manager. So I do a lot of different things. I wear a lot of hats. One is to help William, who's our project and internship specialist, manage our intern program, which you saw Melissa, who's one of our longest running interns, and we have 10 to 15 others. So we're very lucky to work with a lot of students. I also work on a variety of large initiatives in our office related to waste, transportation, food, heavily involved in the sustainability plan development, and how I can assist you. If you ever want to reach out, get to know me more, I'm happy to talk to you about starting initiatives in your own department or student clubs, specifically around waste, which is my favorite. And you can read my fun fact at the bottom. I won't read it for you, but feel free, if you're ever interested in the Peace Corps, to reach out.
My name is Derek. I am the data scientist on Brown's sustainability team. I'm coming over from MIT. I was there for about 3.5 years, and I joined the Brown team about a year ago. It's gone by pretty fast, and really enjoyed being part of the team and within the Department of Facilities. So my role relates to, very broadly, to kind of anything involved with sustainability data. So that could include water usage, utility usage of the buildings, the greenhouse gas emissions from a variety of sources across campus, so on and so forth. And we'll help kind of source that data, wrangle it, and put it together to kind of help us track towards some of our goals. I can help you if you want to, talk about sustainability data. Maybe you want to do a research project or integrate it with coursework. We are slowly but steadily gaining access to some pretty interesting and rich data sets. And my fun fact, I grew up in Rhode Island, actually in the southern part of the state, and only recently moved back this summer.
All right, thank you so much for the wonderful introductions. So our first presenter will be Jess Berry, our director, and she's going to talk about how Brown has defined its sustainability priorities in phase 1 of the sustainability plan.
So I hope that everybody that's joining us today has heard about the Brown sustainability plan that has been in development for the past year or so, and is in this phase 1 is in its final stage. That's just waiting approval. But what I'm going to do now is go through a little bit about the phase 1 of the plan and how we got there, and then transition into phase 2. Erin will take over what phase 2 is going to look like. And then Derek is going to give an overview of how his role of being our data scientist filters into the overall plan and the success of the plan. So just a brief history about sustainability at Brown. It goes well before 2013, but strategic planning really started to form around 2013. And some of you may remember what we called SPAC, the Strategic Sustainability Planning Advisory Committees. These were, for the most part, ad hoc committees that were comprised of students, faculty, and staff. We had 5 committees and then added a 6th in the last years of SPAC. And these were really self-driven. So we had these committees that were really talking about what was going on at Brown and what were ways that, that Brown could enhance sustainability within its walls. And there was really no focus on priorities or how we would allocate resources and how we would prioritize projects, and really no understanding of what really mattered. It was really, there was broad understandings of sustainability, and a lot of those were discussed. And while there's huge value to SPAC, we've evolved over the years to where we are today. Which is back in 2018, I entered into the director position. And one of my first kind of initiatives or ideas, having been with the office for several years, was a feeling that there was a lack of a real plan in place. And it made my job very difficult because it was hard to focus efforts and allocate resources. And so here's just a kind of a fun word cloud that gives an example of what, and as I'm talking about prioritizing resources, gives an example about many of the inquiries that the Office of Sustainability gets in any given day. This is I think in the time frame of 6 months of emails and conversations and suggestions that we received. And as you can see, it's a lot to undertake, and some are kind of low-hanging fruit and easy to tackle, while others are really complicated and complex. And so we struggled with how do we take these ideas and suggestions and formalize them into a way where we're able to say, you know what, this is what we're going to focus on, even though this is important. It's not going to be a primary focus of the university's sustainability efforts at this time. And where we were behind is that our peers had these plans. So as part of the Ivy Plus Sustainability Consortium, I was privileged to really understand and be intimate with other universities' plans, sustainability plans. And a lot of them were what we hope to have is some sort of document that really outlines what these schools prioritize and as their principles and guiding principles for everything from planning, design, and construction of buildings to dining services to transportation. Just a little bit, we talked a little bit about 2018. In 2019, Stephen Porter was, it was 2018-19, Stephen Porter, a faculty member, was appointed to Assistant Provost for Sustainability. And this was really exciting because as far as I know, and he knows, this position has not been formalized anywhere in a university before. And it was really one of the gaps that we at the Office of Sustainability had over many years, is that lack of, while we had a lot of faculty that were supportive of us and very engaged with us, there was a lack of formalized connection between the operations of the university and the faculty and academia of the university. And so this was really exciting. And while Stephen's primary focus right off the bat was to really lead the new greenhouse gas emissions goals, which we'll talk about in a little bit, he and I also had conversations about developing a broader reaching strategic plan. And and with that, we asked Leah Van Wey to also join us, along with several faculty experts that were engaged, to develop a draft of this phase 1 of the plan that was really to outline the overarching priorities of the university. In the winter of 2019, we took that draft and we released it to the community for feedback, had several town halls and an online feedback forum. We received an enormous amount of really valuable feedback, and we're able to take it to a committee that we had formed that was comprised of students, faculty, and staff again, that could look at that feedback, the community feedback, and see where that feedback can and should be incorporated into the final draft of phase 1 of the plan. And where we stand now is phase 1 is sitting with the president and the provost for final approval. And we're hoping that that happens, and we expect for that to happen relatively soon. So this is kind of where we get into the meat of what it looks like. And this is after the feedback. So you might see some new additions to what you may have seen in the original draft. Section 1 is really about campus operations, and this is where the Office of Sustainability really leads. And that's to develop, to bring together students, faculty, and staff in several committees. It's going to be about 13 committees that will take the priorities and parse them out into specific goals that have objectives and have metrics associated with them, have projects associated with them, and have an identification of any university resources, be it financial or human resources, that are needed to accomplish those goals. And then there are 2 other sections that are really under the purview of Stephen Porter to lead. The second is education, and he's really working on the faculty side to increase the opportunities in the area of sustainability. And hopefully at some point we can get Stephen to present on that at another panel. And then the last one is engagement beyond Brown's campus, which we heard a lot about in the feedback we received. And Stephen will be leading this along with Al Dahlberg, who is the Vice President for Government and Community Relations. As you might remember, hopefully, we had 5 key priority areas. Those did not change. We have a greenhouse gas emission reduction, nutrient pollution reduction, safeguarding of human health, reduction of water use and impacts, and curbing biodiversity loss. And I'm not going to go into, I'll go into briefly what those look like, but I do want to make a note here about environmental justice, because this was something in the feedback that was really prevalent. And we thought pretty intensively about how to incorporate environmental justice, what that looks like. And we got a lot of, as I said, we got a lot of feedback from the community, but also the committee that reviewed that feedback was really helpful in guiding how we could incorporate environmental justice into the overall plan. So hopefully everybody has heard about our greenhouse gas emissions goals. This is not going to be a specific committee, or at least number 1 and 2 are not, because those are well underway and planned for. But we do have new greenhouse gas emissions goals. We plan to achieve 75% reduction in our campus emissions by 2025. This is against a 2018 baseline. And then we will reach net zero by 2040. And we have a plan for that. And there are several phases to that plan, but they're well underway. And then the other one is campus electrification and fuel switching. So what's important is that by 2040 is that we are a campus that is electrified without on-site combustion. And that electricity is sourced from renewable sources, be it solar or wind. And then the third, which there will be a committee for, is quantifying and tracking our Scope 3 emissions. And so as I think many of you know, scope 3 emissions are the really difficult ones. It's things like travel, purchases, food, things that aren't as easily measured as something like how much natural gas or how much electricity we consume on an annual basis. And there's been work there's been work underway on scope 3 emissions in the past. And so we have a good kind of foothold on it and understanding about it, but this will formalize another committee that will tackle particularly travel and commuting to start. So this is something that I don't think the university knows. Many people at the university don't know that we've been doing for quite a long time. We have been part of a study through the University of Virginia and a larger consortium of universities that has been developing a tool for nitrogen reduction, tracking and reduction, and it's called the nitrogen footprint tool. And you know, we've been doing this for several years, but at this point we didn't have any goals around that. We've been tracking it, we've been fine tuning. It's been a bit of a bumpy ride based on the data that was available, but we're close to having a really good understanding of a baseline of our nitrogen, particularly nitrogen footprint. And so a goal has been set already through the phase 1 of the plan to achieve a 15% reduction below our FY18 baseline in nitrogen and phosphorus, and a 25% reduction by 2030. And so I think this is doable. It's ambitious, but we've already been working with I'm gonna back up there. A lot of that, the nitrogen and phosphorus that brown contributes to is based around the food purchases that we make. And we've already been working with Brown Dining Services to identify ways to reduce those. This one's kind of exciting. It's something new for the Office of Sustainability. It's also a very complex one when you get into thinking about purchasing decisions. We at the university, tens of millions of dollars in purchases, everything from lab equipment to pencils to materials for buildings and construction. It's very complex, and there will be a committee that is formed to identify where the biggest impacts are in our purchases when it comes to biodiversity, and what should that look like in terms of developing goals around reducing those impacts. The second one is a bit more tangible. It's about the biodiversity in our physical grounds operations, and what can we do to increase the biodiversity of our area, including things like pollinator gardens, reducing environmental impacts and health impacts when it comes to things like pesticides and fertilizers. So there'll be a group looking at that as well. Water's been something that the Office of Sustainability has always worked on intermittently. We have, as a university, we've already implemented quite a few water conservation measures, everything from low flow water fixtures to stormwater runoff mitigation techniques when it comes to new buildings and major renovations. But this group will really look at how we can further that, how we can reduce our impact on stormwater runoff, as well as increase our opportunities for water conservation. And human health goals. This one is really exciting for me. I think that we are in a position where we have a new dean of the School of Public Health that we've already engaged that is also very excited about this initiative and we'll be working with them closely on this. But it's really to look at developing a quote unquote red list for the university of products, materials, chemicals of concern that we will no longer use when it comes to construction when it comes to dining services or grounds maintenance, custodial. We'll be looking at a lot of those different chemicals of concern and coming up with Brown's own red list and alternatives to those materials. And then there are other human health things that we'll be looking at, things like air and noise pollution. We're certainly looking at the replacement of gas-powered vehicles in terms of our fleet as well as equipment. I know everybody will be very excited to hear when we no longer have gas-powered leaf blowers, that will have quieter electric versions of leaf blowers. I can't wait until that day. And then there's this third one of determining the extent that climate change could impact the health of Brown students, staff, and faculty. And this one's it doesn't feel as concrete as the other ones, but I think that it's important for us to have a group of experts in the room to talk about looking forward in the impacts of climate change and what that could mean for the health of the Brown community. I hope that that gave you a really nice overview of what phase 1 of the plan was and is, and how it's evolved. And so I think that at this point, I will turn it over to Erin. Erin is our program manager. She is going to be one of the leads on phase 2, which is really taking action on the priorities I just talked about. Erin, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. I have the pleasure of really talking about, I think, the exciting part, which is really starting to operationalize all of these priorities that we've identified. So as Jess mentioned, in phase 1, we are really looking for a way to guide the university in decision-making and in priority setting when related to sustainability. You took a look at Jess's word cloud and you can see that sustainability is just so multifaceted. There are so many competing priorities, and so we really need to find a way to set those priorities to move forward and really dive into these initiatives that are going to be impactful instead of just skimming the surface on many different things, as much as I would love to see beehives be one of the first things we look at. And what the phase 2 groups are going to really be looking at is setting these long-term objectives and articulating specific goals and how we're going to get there. So in phase 2, there's 3 main leads as well as a variety of other people who will be assisting. One of the first people is Dallas Scott, who we've had the pleasure of working with at Brown for, I believe, over 10 years now. And she's a consultant that worked for a company called Greener You for years and has recently started her own company called Trust. And because Dallas has worked on the SPAC groups that Jess has mentioned and been working at Brown for so long, she knows Brown in and out. And she'll be able to really hit the ground running and help us with our sustainability goals in this planning process. And then Jess, of course, as our director, will be heavily involved. And then I'll be working really hand in hand with Dallas in setting up the committee meetings and facilitating those meetings and really making sure that the groups have all the resources that they need. In addition to us 3, there's also our administrative staff. We have our admin assistant, Joelle Hernandez. We have our project and internship specialist, William Poole, and we have 5 amazing undergrad interns who are also going to be working with these groups throughout the whole process. So as Jess mentioned, really getting into the meat of the plan. So we identified these 5 priority areas, and then she mentioned that there are going to be 13 committees, or we're referring to them as operational working groups, or OWGs. We think it sounds a little cooler than committees. So we really broke it into these 13 groups. So under each bucket, starting with greenhouse gases, Jess mentioned that we're really going to be focusing on scope 3 emissions. And that means any emissions that can be contributed to activities that Brown doesn't own or that Brown doesn't control. So for example, one of the first groups is going to be looking into travel and commuting, which you can imagine is really difficult to pin down. So we'll be looking at travel for research. We'll be looking at travel associated with students flying to and from campus, faculty and staff commuting on a daily basis, maybe not daily right now, but hopefully soon in the future. The second group, Jess also alluded to, is food purchases. Food has a pretty significant impact when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, as well as nutrients. So we'll actually be combining a group that's under nutrients with our greenhouse gas food purchases group. So we'll also be looking at assessing red meat and dairy, since we found that red meat and dairy and really dining purchases in general have a pretty significant impact on our nitrogen footprint. And that group, which I'm specifically excited about, will really be setting kind of our priorities and how we pick our vendors and how we choose which food we're sourcing on campus. And then the third group under greenhouse gases, actually this one is probably my favorite because I'm most involved in waste, is waste reuse and diversion and reduction. So really taking a look at how we can improve what we're already doing, which is, composting initiatives and recycling and donation programs. For our second bucket, nutrients, I already mentioned that red meat and dairy assessment group. And then we'll also have an OWG group on fertilizer reduction, which Jess mentioned. And then third bucket, we'll have two groups. One is going to be looking at biodiversity impacts related to grounds. So we'll be working with a lot of our facilities management folks to really assess how we currently manage our grounds operations on campus related to fertilizer, related to maybe implementing pollinator gardens and other types of activities like that. And then that second group is going to be how our purchasing decisions impact biodiversity. And you can think about this, with an example, like should we perhaps be sourcing hardwoods from tropical rainforests, or could we get that somewhere else? And then the last two buckets, so we have water. Of course, we'll have an OWG on water conservation. We've been working on water conservation initiatives for a long time now. And of course, we want to identify further opportunities where we can continue doing this good work. And then the last two groups are somewhat tied. One is going to be focusing on the reduction of impervious surfaces at Brown. So that's looking at reducing hard concrete roadways or sidewalks, and potentially converting that to surfaces that rain can actually absorb into, whether that's green spaces or semi-permeable surfaces. And then the last group is stormwater assessment. This is something that in recent years, Brown has already kind of embarked on and worked with consultants, as well as a class with Don King, if anyone knows Don King, on looking at our stormwater impacts in the community. And we're going to be further looking into that and what we can do as a university. And then lastly, as Jess mentioned, I'm also extremely excited about this human health bucket. I think there's so much great work that can be done. One of the first operational working groups is going to be that red list and chemical reduction group. So we'll be working with our public health folks to really take a look at, what chemicals and products we, should not be using or sourcing at Brown. And then, as Jess mentioned, we'll also be looking at air and noise pollution, and also a group on our climate change impacts in the community. And hopefully this is really just kind of a helpful chart that shows you how all of these groups are going to be working together. And so you can see there's a lot of different groups. There's 13. They will not be commencing at the same time, because I think our office would be very overwhelmed if we had 13 groups going at once. So we've identified a few that will be starting hopefully shortly, and then we'll stagger their start time. So for the next year or so. And all of these groups will be working with our Office of Sustainability staff. So again, that includes myself and Jess, our consultant, interns, and really our job is to facilitate these groups and provide any resources, help them with research, anything they need to really be able to make the decisions and create the plans that they need. And then all of this will filter up to Jess as the director, and Stephen Porter, who's our assistant provost of sustainability, who will finally report up to the president, provost, and our senior leadership. So I know I actually already saw a question about this. How are we actually selecting folks to sit on these committees? So since this is really focusing on the operational side of the university, the majority of people sitting on these groups are going to be staff members. And then we'll have 1 or 2 faculty members who sit on these committees as experts, and then 1 to 2 students as well, to make sure that we're getting the perspectives and really representing our community at Brown. Staff are going to be chosen by our office, as well as Stephen, and they'll be chosen based on their topical expertise or their decision-making power or their responsibility when it comes to the certain things we're looking at. Faculty will be appointed by Stephen, to provide topical guidance. And then students will be selected through a UCS process, so the Undergraduate Council of Students. So as a student, you can certainly look out for those application materials and reach out to UCS for more information. Environmental justice. So Jess mentioned this briefly. We heard loud and clear from the community feedback that this is something that the community felt deeply should be woven into the plan. And what does this mean? It really means that all of the operational working groups are going to be tasked with examining environmental burdens and benefits across all populations of both our university community and beyond. And environmental justice will be taken into account when we are forming what initiatives and programs look like. And we'll be working closely with the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity. So that's being defined right now what that process will look like. But we will be working closely with the experts in environmental justice to make sure that this is really looked at smartly and deeply. Okay, so step 2 is baselining. So what we are currently working on is figuring out what we already know. Of course, the university has been working on sustainability for decades. If anyone knows Kurt Teichert or Dave Larson, they were the first sustainability coordinators. Sorry if this is dating you if you're on here, but decades ago. So we've been working on this for a long time. So the plan is really about prioritizing, not starting from scratch. So we really want to make sure we know what's already happening at the university, who are the people who have this knowledge, and we can tap into their knowledge, and what programs and actions are already in place. And step 3 is really filling in the gaps and defining metrics. So I mentioned that we'll have interns and we'll have administrative assistants behind all these working groups to really do some research to see where best practices are and to specifically define metrics. You can see this quote, if you can't measure it, you can't prove it. So we really need to make sure that what comes out of all of these groups, there are specific metrics so that we can see as we move forward over the years that we are achieving what we set out to do, or if we need to tweak things. And this just kind of gives you broad examples of what these metrics could possibly be. These certainly aren't the metrics that have been defined. The operational working groups have not started yet, but just to give you an example, for greenhouse gas reduction, we could possibly look at metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent reduced compared to a baseline. For nutrient reduction, we could look at the concentration of nitrogen in local waterways, et cetera, et cetera. But the importance of metrics is definitely one that we'll be focused on. And lastly, deliverables in action. So I'm sure you've all heard of SMART goals, but we'll really need to make sure that all of these groups are focusing on specific goals. So defining specific goals and initiatives that are measurable. So again, identifying metrics for evaluation, that they're achievable and realistic. So working with our upper administration and going back to that org chart, seeing that we're working with upper administration, our provost, our president, to make sure that these things are achievable and that we have the resources to accomplish what we set out to. And lastly, that they're timely. One thing that's different from the SPAC groups is we didn't necessarily have set timelines and accountability structures for how these goals and projects were going to be achieved. So we'll be making sure that we do have deadlines and realistic actions in place. Wonderful. Melissa, I'll hand it over to you to introduce Derek.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. Your presentation was very insightful. Our final presenter is Derek Wietzma, our data scientist, who will explain how he manages data to support and track Brown's success with our sustainability goals. Derek, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. In higher ed sustainability, we talk a lot about data, and those conversations will continue and gain focus in our strategic plan working groups. That data science is really a strong complement to our higher ed sustainability and will really play a key role in our working groups. So most practically, in order to track the goals that we set, we need to be able to reliably and in a reproducible way deliver those metrics, right? So that's really kind of the main point of my section here. So I'll say it again for simplicity. We're going to set goals. In order to measure how we're tracking towards those goals, we need reliable data to feed in to understand how we're doing and what the trends are. So a lot of the greatest needs, I would argue right now, are really what we call descriptive statistics. It's more traditional business intelligence, or BI, if you're familiar with those terms. Often these two kind of get a bad rap in the data science community. You know, they aren't neural nets, and they're not using some of the sexier machine learning algorithms, right? But they can be really, really impactful, and they're really important. And they're not always easy. They can be very complex as well. So don't sleep on descriptive statistics. Moving forward, because sustainability topics are so complex and interconnected, often with each other, there is a lot of opportunity to identify relationships between different variables and to help us understand why those metrics might be going up or going down. So if you actually go back one slide, Melissa. So Thanksgiving break is coming up quick, and this comic shows some Turkey data scientists who are nervous to find that gravy sales are going up, which presumably means sales of turkey, a complementary good, may soon go up. So these are, you know, the types of relationships that you can find that just help give you additional insight into some of the trends that you might be finding with your descriptive statistics. Combining data science with sustainability, and here's kind of some of the key points. It helps us assess performance, which is what I've been talking about. It can really be a powerful engagement tool as well. So it helps people, you know, understand what we're doing. You can, you know, build some beautiful visualizations, or you can even get into some really interesting campus installations or artwork type of stuff that is data driven at its core. Supporting the mission, it's another good way for our office to connect to the core educational mission of the university. So students can get involved in projects, you know, as we collect these hopefully rich and interesting data sources over time. It's opportunity to kind of study, to use the campus as a living lab and as a test bed for research, to kind of test new ideas or explore different ideas. And we can sometimes, you know, draw that into the curriculum as well. So it's a good way to engage folks. Automation, you know, just data science in general, when you're scripting things and coding, it can help, you know, create manual tasks that often sustainability offices kind of do manually. Year over year, we can take some of that and automate it so that we can kind of build to our portfolio over time, rather than just kind of reaching a capacity limit and then you're just managing that same amount of work year over year. And hopefully it can help us make decisions and make decisions more intelligently. Okay, so a lot of this foundational data work is already underway. And like Erin mentioned earlier, the plan doesn't mean that we're starting from scratch by any means, but it is a great opportunity for us to prioritize. And I wanted to spend one or two slides very quickly here to talk about an example of some of the work that we're doing. And this is also relates to one of the 5 priority areas of the plan, and that is greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gas, the inventory has been one of my main projects since I started at Brown. So over the last year, I've been spending a lot of time on that. And we've essentially totally overhauled the way that the university tracks its greenhouse gas emissions. We've expanded the scope greatly, so we're including a lot more things in the inventory, and that's everything that's on the screen here. Of course, it includes, you know, campus utilities, but we are now including majority of real estate utilities as well. We're including things like gases that research groups might purchase. We are including diesel and propane that facilities uses for a variety of different, you know, for groundskeeping, for example. We're including the gasoline and the fuels that our vehicle fleets use, whether that's facilities fleets or campus safety or so on and so forth, refrigerants. So we're packing a lot in here. And this is all guided by the Climate Registry, which is a national, international protocol that has very strict standards and really kind of lays out how organizations should do this. So we are now adhering and reporting through the climate registry, which means that will also be third-party verified. So the data will be assured that it's of high quality. We're expanding the scope. And finally, we're reporting more than just CO2. So we're going to report a whole suite of greenhouse gases that include methane and a variety of other gases. So we get all of this raw data from all of those different sources that I talked about, and the data is in all different formats, and we have to essentially distill it all into simple metrics, which in this case, the metric is pretty straightforward. It's metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And we're now able to do this reliably year over year, and we have a lot of depth that we can drill down into. So we're just showing the first 2 years here. Our new greenhouse gas goal starts, our baseline year is 2018. I just finished 2020 today, so I didn't include that here. But this is the type of metric tracking that we're talking about, where we can take a lot of very complex and raw, messy data and kind of distill it into these simple metrics that will really help us understand how we're tracking towards the goals that we set. And finally, just a quick plug that although data can be a really helpful tool to advance sustainability at the community or local level, it does have its limits. So we'll want to be cognizant of those as well. I would argue the two main reasons why there are limitations is just the complexity of some of these issues for sustainability. So if you think of something like purchasing, right? Imagine all the purchasing that a university does. It's highly decentralized. And you might ask the question of what matters with purchasing. Do we care about local? We want to focus on local vendors. Do we want to focus on minority-owned vendors or enterprises? Do we want to only purchase, from certain certifications, right? So there's a lot of different ways to look at these complex issues. And it's really kind of more of our core value set that the strategic groups will help identify, that will then be able to take that and then be able to kind of more focus in on the metrics that matter, right? So we'll kind of, in some cases, the information coming from the working groups will feed into the data rather than reverse. And also data availability or quality can sometimes be a challenge as well. And that's true really of data anywhere in the world, pretty much. So this comic here, you can see the joke, hopefully, right? That they didn't have enough data, so they put it on the y-axis. So the working groups will really help us identify what matters most, and then we can go out and find those data and figure out how to use them to track towards and accelerate progress towards those goals.
All right, thank you so much, Derek. That sounds like you have a lot of things to do in your office regarding measuring data. All right, now we will be moving on to the Q&A section of the program. Please submit any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom call. And I believe we already had some people ask questions. All right, so the first question is, can we read the draft plan while it is in wait for approval by the president and the provost?
At the moment, it's actually in editing phase, so it doesn't make sense to share that with you now. But I can assure you that it's in that final editing phase, so it should be released to the community relatively soon. As you hopefully know, the corporation meetings are going on, and that's a key priority right now for administrative leadership. And once that has concluded, I do know that the release of this plan is one of their priorities.
Our next question is, how will the plan incorporate the surrounding neighborhoods?
If you remember earlier in the discussion about phase one. There is a group that will be led by Stephen Porter and Al Dahlberg, who is the Vice President for Government and Community Relations. And they will be working through an internal committee to determine the answer to that exact question, the engagement of the broader community in Brown's sustainability goals.
Will the metrics be available and accessible to the Brown community and to the Providence community?
Yes, but I'm also going to turn it over to Derek so he can explain the long-term plans for kind of his vision for access to data.
I would agree. Yes. In the vast majority of cases, we definitely would want to make those accessible at least to the Brown community and probably to the greater public and area. Like I mentioned, I think it's a great opportunity to continue engage and raise awareness in some of these topics. And there's a variety of different ways that we can go about doing that. So we're already thinking right now, what we have, we've overhauled the greenhouse gas inventory. We have the numbers coming in, all the scripting is done, the methodology is set. Now we're starting to switch gears and focus on, how do we want to present that and make that available to the broader community? So we're thinking about building some kind of interactive web visuals to start. And that can be posted on our website or other websites, and we can kind of add to this library of charts over time. But that's definitely something that we're thinking about and excited to work on moving forward.
The next question we have is, what is the timeline for the solar fields and the wind farm?
So actually, our wind farm is operational. We have about two and a half wind turbines in Texas that are producing electricity as we speak, and we are tracking the amount of renewable electricity that we are producing each month, and so you will certainly see some reports on that in the coming annual reports for FY21. And in terms of the solar field, it is currently in the early phases of construction and expected to be online in late December 2021.
And a quick fun fact, our wind turbines, we found out, are called White Horse One. Oh, they're not called that anymore.
Do you have composting in place, and for instance, from excess food at the campus, and could this be used as fertilizer?
We do have compost. So about 4 years ago, we started a composting program with Dining Services. So we have composting in what we call our backup house. So all of our staff members compost all of our food prep waste in all of our locations. And then we have a front of house where diners can also compost normally in Sharp. Obviously things are a little bit different right now, but it's available there. And technically in Verney Willy, during normal operations, when you put your tray on that conveyor belts, all of your food is being composted there as well. And then we do have composting at a few other small locations. And we are certainly always, looking to improve our composting programs. And additionally, there is a student group, Scrap, that has a compost facility on campus that isn't operational at the moment because of COVID, but normally you're able to compost through them as well.
Will grad students, postdocs, or community members have an opportunity to be included in the OWGs? And will the OWG also report broadly or sit in open forums for community discussion?
That's a great question. Currently, we're just looking at involving undergraduate students. That doesn't mean that there won't be opportunities for engagement. Certainly throughout the process, we're going to make sure that we're communicating out on our progress, whether it's through presentations such as this, or other means of website or reports, as Jess mentioned, our annual report. But at the moment, we are just focusing on having undergraduate students in those OWGs.
I will say that if there are graduate students or medical students that are interested in a specific topic, it's certainly worth reaching or yeah, it's certainly worth reaching out to us to see if there's opportunity to be involved and at what level.
Mm-hmm.
Given the ongoing reduction of the campus population because of the pandemic, have you considered how limiting or reducing faculty and staff commutes via work from home opportunities may impact Scope 3 emissions reduction? It would be interesting if you could compare data from this year with 2018 baseline data.
Yeah, that is a really interesting discussion and one that we're having with the Ivy Plus Consortium and have kind of trading notes on what we're experiencing due to the pandemic. And there's a lot of different experiences across universities. Certainly the commuting is a major one, that there's an obvious reduction in emissions associated with commuting. And then there are impacts to everything from waste to energy consumption, and they've been surprising, certainly. And we hope that at some point we're able to kind of understand the data associated with the pandemic and be able to compare it to previous years or years in the future that are quote unquote more normal.
Do you think Brown can achieve carbon neutrality anytime soon? Will you be partnering with organizations in order to do this?
So we have a goal of net zero by 2040, and that's our time frame. We will reduce our emissions by 75% by 2025. A majority of that is attributed to the wind and solar projects that we have partnered with developers on, and then the remainder of that 25% is really looking at electrifying campus, and that takes there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be undertaken in order to reach that, including looking at every building and electrifying, getting it to the point where it can be electrified if it's on the central heat loop, or if it's freestanding, how to remove combustion from those buildings and electrify those buildings. So it's a huge undertaking, and it's actually quite ambitious to reach it by 2040. So, but we're confident we can reach that goal.
The next question is a bit specific. In regard to water reduction, would the university consider switching out auto flush toilets with manual dual flush toilets instead? The auto flush toilet sensors tend to be too sensitive and will flush multiple times when an occupant is in the stall.
Oh, I've had that happen to me. Thank you, Jean, for the question. I was looking at the questions. Yes, I mean, that's certainly something that we'd look at. These working groups are going to be throwing all options on the table. And that is certainly something that, we've seen at other universities and other organizations that does work. We've used it, in buildings on campus already. So we will certainly take a look at implementing those and whether that, that could be something that is a priority for us.
I think the one thing to add to that, is that that's actually, that's a mechanical issue with the toilets. If you're experiencing that, that's not something that I've heard of as a concern. So it's really important that when folks around the campus see things like that or experience things like that, that they contact facilities management and make a note of it and get it repaired if necessary, or if able. So that's it's a really great first step. And then certainly bringing it to our attention, not that we will be able to jump on replacing those or even if understanding if that's going to be a high priority or not, but it's certainly good to know of those issues because we do sit with planning, design, and construction during their projects. And so bringing those issues up is always helpful.
How do the 13 groups mentioned relate to environmental justice?
I think I understand that question. So basically with every environmental decision that's made, with every initiative that we propose, there are impacts to different communities. And that could be on a positive side or a negative side. So as we're looking at, as all of these groups are looking at potential initiatives and projects, what we can promise is that we will be assessing those impacts as best as we can. There's certainly no way to completely mitigate, any, or to have it completely balanced for every population, but we're going to be doing our best to make sure that we assess those things and that is really brought into our decision making. And again, we'll be working very closely with the Office of Institutional Research or Equity and Diversity to make sure that we're really approaching that correctly and that we're transparent with them and kind of giving them progress reports and access to what the groups are discussing. I hope that answers your question. Not sure if I fully understood, but feel free to submit another question if not.
Is there going to be any collaboration or consultation with the Providence Climate Justice Plan, considering it came out recently?
Yeah, so this will fall in the purview of that community engagement group that Stephen and Al Dahlberg will be spearheading. I believe I'll be involved with that. I am familiar with the Providence Climate Action Plan and the heavy hand of environmental justice on in that plan. And there's a lot of things that are very complementary to what Brown is doing, and ideally that group can find a way that we can collaborate or partner together in any one of those initiatives.
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending tonight's event and all the questions you provided. For any additional questions, please email us at sustainability@brown.edu. We look forward to seeing you at future events and have a good evening.